Most people think they understand their rights inside their own home until the exact moment those rights are tested. And by then, it's usually too late. For years across the United States, something was happening quietly. No headlines, no national outrage, no widespread attention. But it was happening again and again inside ordinary homes just like yours. Police officers were entering private homes without a warrant and leaving with legally owned firearms. Not because a judge approved it, not because a crime had been proven, but because of something that, on the surface, sounded reasonable, something that sounded almost helpful. And then suddenly, everything stopped. The Supreme Court stepped in, not 5-4, not even 6-3, a full 9-0 unanimous decision. Every single justice agreed. And when that happens, it's not just important, it's a signal that something had gone too far. So the real question is this: what exactly was happening behind closed doors that forced all 9 justices to draw a hard line? And more importantly, what does that decision mean for you the next time there's a knock at your door? Because this wasn't a minor legal adjustment. This wasn't a technical clarification buried in legal language. This was a constitutional line drawn at the entrance of your home, and what it protects is far more powerful than most people realize. Welcome to Global Entry News. I'm Edward, and I break down the legal decisions that don't just exist in textbooks, but actually show up in real life. The kind of situations that can happen to anyone, without warning, on an ordinary day that suddenly turns into something much bigger. And what we're talking about today is one of those moments. Because this case isn't just about firearms, it's not just about police procedures, it's about what happens when authority meets your front door and where your rights truly begin. And to understand why this decision matters so much, you need to understand how it all started. Because it didn't begin in a courtroom, it began in a normal home, on a normal night, with a situation that spiraled in a way no one expected. A husband and wife in Rhode Island were having an argument. Emotions were high, voices were raised. The kind of situation that happens in homes across the country every single day. But in the middle of that argument, something happened that would later become the center of a Supreme Court case. The husband went to another room, retrieved one of his legally owned firearms, brought it back, placed it on the table, and said something emotionally charged, something dramatic, essentially telling his wife to go ahead and use it. Now, no shots were fired, no physical harm occurred, but moments like that, even without violence, leave an impact. His wife was shaken. She left the house and stayed somewhere else for the night. And the next morning, she called the police. When officers arrived, they weren't responding to a crime scene. They were responding to what's called a welfare check. Concern, not danger. They spoke with him. The situation appeared calm. No immediate threat. No signs of violence. But then the conversation shifted. The officers suggested he go to the hospital for a psychiatric evaluation, not as an order, as a suggestion. They presented it as cooperation, as a step toward resolving everything smoothly. Go to the hospital, get checked, come back home. No charges, no escalation, just a temporary detour. And trusting that process, he agreed. He left voluntarily, got into the ambulance, went to the hospital, believing that cooperation would be respected and that everything would be exactly as he left it when he returned. But while he was sitting in that hospital, something else was happening. Back at his home, the same officers returned. This time, they didn't ask permission. They didn't go to a judge. They didn't get a warrant. They entered his home and began searching. And when they found his firearms, they took them, just like that. No court approval, no immediate emergency, just a decision made in the moment. When he was released from the hospital, he wasn't charged with anything. He wasn't declared dangerous. He came back home expecting life to continue normally. Instead, he found his firearms gone. And when he asked for them back, he was told no. That's the moment where everything changes. Because now, this isn't about an argument. It's not about a welfare check. It's about something much bigger. Can the government enter your home without a warrant and take your property even when you cooperated, even when no crime was committed, and even when a judge was never involved? And once that question exists, it doesn't just apply to one person, it applies to everyone. So he did something most people don't do, but probably should. He fought back, not just to get his property returned, but to challenge how it was taken in the first place. Because from his perspective, the issue was simple: no warrant, no judge, no crime. Yet his home was entered, and his property was taken. So he filed a lawsuit, arguing that what happened was a direct violation of the Fourth Amendment. And in plain terms, that amendment says something incredibly powerful. The government cannot enter your home and take your property without following legal process first. That process matters because it's the line between authority and overreach. And here's where this starts hitting close to home. Because nothing about his situation was extreme. No raid, no criminal investigation, no urgent danger. In fact, he cooperated. And that's exactly when his rights were bypassed. So now ask yourself this: if it happened in that situation, what would stop it from happening in yours? A neighbor misunderstanding something, a stressful moment reported out of context, a late-night call that doesn't tell the full story. That's why this case didn't stay small. It moved through the courts, gaining attention, because the answer would define what police can and cannot do inside homes across the entire country. And here's where things get even more important, because the officers didn't claim they were investigating a crime. They didn't say there was immediate danger. Instead, they relied on something called the community caretaking exception. Now that phrase sounds harmless, helpful even, like something designed to protect people. And originally, it was. Decades ago, this concept applied to cars. If a vehicle was abandoned or creating a hazard, officers could act quickly without a warrant. That made sense, but over time, that idea expanded, slowly, quietly, until it reached homes. Police departments began using that same logic to justify entering houses. Wellness checks, concern calls, mental health situations. And in many of those cases, firearms were taken, not by a judge, not through a formal process, but through a decision made on the spot. And most people never even realized it was happening, because it usually started with something that felt routine: a knock, a conversation, a request to come inside just to make sure everything's okay. But once that threshold was crossed, everything could change. So when this finally reached the Supreme Court, the question wasn't just about one case anymore. It was about a pattern, a growing expansion of authority into the most private place people have, their home. And when the decision came down, it was absolute, unanimous, clear. The answer was no. The court said the community caretaking exception does not apply to homes at all. The distinction was simple but powerful. A car is different. A home is sacred under the Constitution. Privacy is strongest there. Protections are highest there. And the government faces its strictest limits there. The court made it clear: you cannot create a vague, expandable justification to bypass the Constitution. If officers want to enter your home, they need a warrant or a real immediate emergency, not concern, not caution, not convenience, an actual emergency. And that line is no longer up for debate. So, what does this mean in real life? It means this: if police knock on your door and say they just want to come in and check on things, you are not required to let them in. You can speak to them. You can step outside. You can be respectful. But entry into your home is different. It requires your consent or a warrant. And once you give consent, everything changes. That's why understanding this matters. Because in real situations, People don't think legally, they react emotionally. They assume cooperation equals protection. But now, you know better. You can calmly say, I don't consent to any searches or entry without a warrant. No argument, no escalation, just clarity. And that clarity protects you. Because this ruling didn't just change the future, it may affect the past. People who had firearms taken under that same justification now have a potential path to challenge it. Not automatically, not easily, but the door is open, and that matters. But here's where people get confused. This ruling does not mean police can never enter your home without a warrant. If there's a real emergency, they can. If someone's in danger, they will. That hasn't changed. What changed is this. They can't use vague reasoning to bypass the system. They can't skip the process. And that distinction is everything. Because this decision reinforces something bigger. Rights don't disappear overnight. They erode slowly, one exception at a time, one justification at a time, until suddenly, what was once protected isn't anymore. What the Supreme Court did here was stop that drift. They drew a line and said, this is where it ends. But here's the truth most people don't think about. None of this matters if you don't know it, because in the moment it happens, you won't have time to research. You'll rely on what you already understand. And now you understand this. Your home is where your rights are strongest. Consent is your choice. Process matters. And authority has limits. That knowledge doesn't create conflict. It creates clarity. And clarity changes everything. So the next time there's a knock at your door, you won't just react. You'll understand. And that's what separates people who keep their rights from people who unknowingly give them away. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a situation where police showed up for a welfare check and things went further than you expected? What happened? Drop your experience in the comments, because real stories often reveal what headlines never do. And if you want more breakdowns like this, make sure you subscribe to Global Entry News, because the rules are changing. And the more you understand them, the more control you have when it matters most.